Hello everyone, welcome to Astro Life on Instagram. Wait a minute. Yes, I'm talking the right things. Yeah, just because minutes ago I was in another recording another program that on our YouTube channel we have the Fixed Star, and I was talking with the Christian and talking about Fixed Star. So I was like, what I'm talking about? Am I talking about the? Oh, hello, Mandi. Yes, okay. Just make sure Monday is joining us. So, hello everyone, welcome to Astro Live on Instagram. And today we have a Monday as a guest. Monday is going to talk about the Sun Mars conjunction. Hello, Monday, how are you?
Hi, Rod, how are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. It's just very confused. A busy day for me because I was teaching tarot card a little bit earlier, and then after that, I have a podcast with my Taiwanese student and Taiwan fans. When I finish that, I jump to have a recording with Christian talking about the fixed stars. So when I jumped here, I just make sure am I on the right channel and right program.
It's Wednesday, it's 4 o'clock London.
Thank you. Yeah, a little bit confused. So today we're going to talk about the recent transit. Quite important and quite intense, isn't it?
Yeah, we've currently got the Sun conjunct Mars in Scorpio. Of course, they were in a conjunction for yesterday's new moon with the moon. The moon's now moved on, but we continue really with Sun conjunct Mars up until, well, it kind of peaks around the 24th, 25th of November, by which we're in Sagittarius season. So there's a sign change, and I think they changed signs from Scorpio to Sagittarius within a day of each other. So they're traveling together for quite a while.
Indeed.
So so it's worth, when Rod and I discussed what we were going to talk about today, we thought it's worth talking about Sun conjunct Mars because it's quite intense, isn't it?
It is. Yes. I mean well, we can see in the also in the geopolitical and the world political event is like it's not only political. Look, even Iceland has the Iceland volcano is like ready to erupt. It's kind of holding there. And I remember a couple of days ago, last Friday, we have a lot of different mountain astrologers coming, and Liz Hathaway joined us, and she was talking about that is a symbol. And I think Louisa also said that it's not only people, it's also the ground is holding there, is going to waiting to erupt. And we have that new moon is also conjunct with the Mars on Monday. That altogether is kind of, trying to like squeeze and push, and just like we are waiting for a sign, like a click and a boom.
Yeah, especially as the new moon, which by the way was yesterday, for the listeners, the new moon yesterday, Uranus was opposite that new moon. So the moon, the sun and the Mars, it's kind of moving on now. It's starting to separate, but it's still, having some influence. So that's about eruptions potentially. I mean, it's unpredictable, isn't it? With Uranus and Mars, it's unpredictable. It can be aggressive, restless. It can bring shocking events, potentially, certainly surprises, instability. We've been seeing all this kind of shaking things up. And if we're talking on the personal level, because we're looking at Scorpio, the personal planet, the sun and the Mars, and obviously for the moon as well yesterday on the new moon, we're talking about emotional instability, emotional intensity, desires and passions running deep. It's a powerful pairing actually. And then when you put opposite Uranus, it's kind of I mean, we've been seeing a lot of explosions every time we put the news on the television. It's obviously emotional sign, isn't it? Scorpio can be a sign that gets obsessed and fixated. It can be an incredible transformational and healing sign. It can also be quite a vengeful sign. So when we're dealing with our emotions, that's something to sort of think about. Which side do you want to bring out in yourself or see in the world? Is it that healing, that transformational, that positive energy? Because I think Mars and Sun together in Scorpio, there's a lot of courage there to be had, and having the courage of your own self-expression, the courage of your own feelings, the courage of your own, what you stand for and your values. What do you think, Rod?
Yes, indeed. I think this Mars and the Sun is not what I mean. Yes, when we hear about the Scorpio, we are usually thinking about a little bit of dark side or a little bit of shadow side, and that certainly make people a little bit uncomfortable. But I'm 100% agree with you about the healing side, because it is about a healing symbol. It is about how we face our own and make it become whole, become a whole. So it would be a challenge work, but we have to deal with it. We have to deal with it, and that is pretty interesting, especially for next couple of days. Mars is already there. Mars is going to align with a fixed star called Agena, which is in the Centaurus, is in the Lake of Centaur, and we know the Lake of Centaur, Lake of Chiron, where he gets injured.
Wow.
Yeah, so Chiron's lake. Usually, there's in the mythology, there's where Chiron get injured by Hercules' sword or poison sword or poison arrow. That's where he get injured. So Benedict Bradley talking about this star called Agena is talking about the pain and the healing in the everyday's life. So we have to face the everyday's life's maybe some important issue in the everyday's life. That could be how we survive, could be how we face the life and death in everyday's life. But it's so minor, but there is an impact in our head, and that is kind of a healing process too, because how Chiron look after his own wound, because that wound is not going to kill him, but he's not going to cure, so-called cure. So it's like, I usually like that kind of a description. I always ask my friend Peter about what's the sentence they say? You cannot win, you cannot draw, and you cannot live again. So what are you going to do if you cannot win, if you cannot draw, and you cannot live the game? You have to deal with it. It's painful. That sounds like a little bit unpleasant, but you have to deal with it, and that is very interesting. Mars is going to conjunct the Sun in that area, and that's quite interesting.
Wow, that is super interesting. It brings a whole new depth of meaning to it, because of course in the myth, Chiron never heals his wound. Like you say, he has to live with it, but he uses his knowledge and his wisdom to heal others. And unlike the other centaurs that were wild, he's very, very, he's the opposite of wild. He's very cultured. And I think on a psychological level as well, when you think about the wounds that we never heal, the wounds that we all carry with us from the things that have happened to us, the traumas, major and minor, that happen to us, we never quite heal from them, because they come through as unconscious patterns of behavior, and they also come through as defense mechanisms. And I think one of the things that Scorpio stands for is those defense mechanisms. It's that kind of thing. Well, Scorpio can be quite secretive. It can hide its emotions. It cannot want to show its vulnerability. Specifically, especially with this Sun conjunct Mars, show no fear, show courage. Don't let yourself be vulnerable, be strong. And that can work really well for anyone. You can really push through life, but there's always kind of that point in life where these wounds whatever they are, large, small, psychological, physical, whatever, they can come back to, oh, okay, you've got to kind of deal with that now. Like you said about the shadow rod, it does eventually come up, but we have to kind of recognize it, don't we?
Yeah, I agree, because that you mentioned about the shadow, and then that is usually a first step of healing, right? Or starting point, because if we couldn't recognize it, we don't know where to start it. And I like this, what you mentioned about, because this conjunction starting at the Scorpio, and which starting an action related to Scorpio, which means a crisis, a healing, and rebirth, or maybe So won't be easy, but it's a very, I would say, it's a very, what should I say? It's a very powerful related to healing, I think.
Someone's just said that Amethyst Astro Tarot, the Nietzsche quote, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." That survival instinct. I mean, you want a strong Scorpio energy around you when you are in a crisis, because Scorpios are best in a crisis because they can take control. So that control that comes with Scorpio can be, positive, or it can be negative. It's about how we kind of use these things. So it's really interesting. I know it's two fast-moving planets, personal planets, but we've got this influence until the end of the month, and it's going to move into Sagittarius. And by the time it moves into Sagittarius, it moves ever closer to a square with Saturn in Pisces. Think about, we just had Uranus opposing that Sun, Mars. When you've got Saturn squaring it, you've got a different picture altogether, haven't you?
Indeed. Yeah, that is very interesting. I just like, when you talk about it, I was just like, I say image about these two is like join hand in hand and say, okay, let's run away from here, and bam, bump into the Saturn, and now just like, hey, where we are, what's happened here right now? Because it's just like they are expecting something quite interesting, because with that Uranus is kind of open up and make them feel excited, make them feel quite excited. But suddenly you run into the Saturn. It's like you were trying to go to a party, but a big called by your parents or called by your, of course.
Yeah, you might get into anything untoward that might have happened when Uranus was there might be paying the price when Saturn comes in there, because Saturn's kind of, a little bit like the police, for example. It's I mean, we're talking about taking measured action, really, when Saturn meets this. I mean, it still comes into orbit, comes into influence as an out of sign square while the Sun and Mars are still in Scorpio. But then obviously it has the exact, I think within a day of each other, exact square when they're in Sagittarius. So it's a mutable square, which gives a little bit more adaptability than when you have the fixed sign of Scorpio that's very fixed. So it invites you to sort of take measured action, right? Doesn't it? Caution. It calls for stability, actually, because when we think about Uranus there, Mars in Scorpio and Sun in Scorpio wants stability. It's a fixed sign. It wants things to be stable. It wants to be in control. Whereas Uranus, even though Uranus is in the fixed sign of Taurus itself, it still kind of shapes things up. But Saturn comes along and it's like, okay, what the decisions that you've made, are they wise? Are they strategic? Again, we've got with Scorpio, with Mars. When you think about Mars in Aries, that's the warrior who goes out there with the spear or the gun or the sword. Whereas Mars in Scorpio, also very strong sign for Mars. It's the strategist, it's the general, it's the one who's moving the pieces around on the board, and that's something to think about as well. And then when Sagittarius when they go into Sagittarius, the Sun and the Mars, then there's perhaps that feeling of being restricted, of perhaps feeling restricted against sort of taking risks, because Saturn asks for caution, brings up fears and doubts, but asks you to be mature in your decisions, as I've said, emotional maturity as well, sensible goals, risks not paying off, that kind of thing. You know, all those Saturn things, fears, doubts, controls, brings control as well. So we've got the control of Scorpio, then the Sagittarius energy comes in, and then more control comes in because Saturn comes to Sagittarius and says, hey, we're not done with control yet, you know, let's but I think it's a bit more, Saturn's quite scary. Saturn asks us to be disciplined, it asks us to work hard even if we don't want to. But there's always a benefit for Saturn if you do Saturn's work. It's the hard taskmaster, but there's always wisdom and lessons to be found in Saturn. So when you're expressing yourself, you're expressing your fears, you're expressing, you know, anger, for example, because Mars is also about anger. It asks you to actually be wise about it and think about it, but not to get too frightened, not to get too much in fear, because Saturn be overwhelming in that respect. What do you think, Rod?
I agree. And this in one way, this Saturn is like a gatekeeper in the, you know, in the Pisces way, and second, which is like when Sun and Mars in a good way, when Sun and Mars move into Sagittarius, well, I think they both have that kind of a fiery and opening up quality. For Mars and the Sun, when they move into the Sagittarius, they're kind of like I'm a hero, I'm coming to save the world. Oh, let's talk about the world peace and let's deal with every problem. There's nothing we can overcome. And the Saturn say, hey, probably you should get off your high horse, because
high horse. That's good for Sagittarius.
Yeah. Sagittarius, but the Saturn in Pisces say, we don't do that here, you know. Saturn would invite them coming down, and a little bit of exchange, because both immutable sign, to exchange different feeling, to understand with Pisces, to understand how other people feel in the everyday life, in the reality. So in that case, I will say, so it is a square. It is a square. But this is how we can do, how we can think, is like it is kind of a gatekeeper to ask you, well, don't be so excited. There's some work, some grunt work we have to do. You know, and we have to deal with that first, because thank God it's just when you move into Sagittarius, it's not like a halfway through, you know. So once you enter that gate, pass that examination, you can start to, you know, yes. You have your idea, we have an idea, or we have like a great goal going to achieve, then we can just start it from the very granted, very stable, very basic way to kick off.
I love gatekeeper for Saturn. It's a great analogy. It's really boundaries, isn't it? Because Saturn's about boundaries. But in Pisces, Saturn can be a bit of a leaky gatekeeper. Boundaries can be leaky, and Sagittarius energy can kind of get in there and infiltrate. So that's something to kind of be aware of, kind of leaky boundaries, particularly kind of emotionally, because we are talking about Mars here. Mars in Sagittarius, like you said, Mars in Sagittarius is like, let's do it, let's save the world, you know, let's have hope and optimism. We need that. That. So
I don't know why are you talking about that. I suddenly have an idea about you know, Alice Adventure in the Wonderland. That tree hole is like a Saturn. You know, you going through there. You going
the
through
rabbit hole.
The rabbit
down
hole,
the rabbit hole.
And then we use the stopwatch. Say, oh, I run out of time or something. Remember? And because in one way, I think suddenly I get an idea. It's like we may get information about something or someone is run out of time, but you are not sure about is that true, because you even couldn't see their stopwatch or something. You just like because this Saturn in Pisces somehow can make us feel a little bit surreal. You know,
Mm,
it's not
mm,
everything granted, not everything solid. It's like, I heard about
mm,
something, but I'm not sure. What do
mm.
you think about that Saturn in Pisces? Because especially it's a
Yeah,
real degree.
I agree. Degree of Pisces, it's kind of gone back and forth, and oh, what's going on? Did I lose a little
We
bit of connection there?
just a tiny bit, just tiny bit.
I got that little circle. You see that Saturn in
Yeah,
Pisces, letting me
yeah.
down.
Wow, fantastic.
But Saturn in Pisces, yeah, I think sometimes you can feel like you're on shaky ground a little bit with Saturn in Pisces. Land movement as well, you know, and things to do with water. If we look in a sort of mundane
Yeah.
astrology, Saturn in Pisces is it's an interesting one because it's not really a very, the sign of Pisces is kind of boundaryless.
Yeah.
You know, it has boundaries really. It's running water, it spreads, you know, whereas Saturn wants to sort of hold it all in. So there's already a tension with Saturn in Pisces, that kind of opposite sort of thing, forces
Mm.
working against each other a little bit. So that's what makes it quite difficult, I think, Saturn in Pisces at the moment, because we are kind of seeing things that are happening in the world, for
Mm.
example, that we think, why can't that just stop? Why
Mm.
can't we come up with the right ideas? Why can't we come up with a solution? And the
Yeah.
more you look at it, the more complicated it gets and the more confusing it's get, and you realize that there actually are no easy answers, and there isn't an easy you know, depending on your point of view, of course, but you know, where is the protagonist in this? Or
Mm-hmm.
there's often multiple protagonists, for example,
Mm.
multiple authorities that can't
Mm.
quite always agree, and we're seeing kind of a lot of that, particularly in our politics in the UK and in elsewhere at the moment. So yeah, interesting. So we wonder what Mars, when you know, when Sun and Mars go into Sagittarius, we can kind of wonder what's going to happen on the international stage. I guess things are going to kind of shift a little bit. Perhaps
Yeah.
they will shift in some way. You know, I think things will be less stuck, but
Mm.
it's to be seen really
Mm-hmm.
in what direction they will shift.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree with you, and then that is kind of the time we can expecting toward the end of this week. We are going to experience even the next week. Even the
Mm-hmm.
next week, this after the Sun and the Mars move into Sagittarius, we are probably going to see that how Sun and the Mars deal with that Saturn. But
Mm-hmm.
what how could we apply this complicated astrology, energy in our this week's life?
Yeah, I think it's about seeing the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
It's about, as I said, measured action,
Mm-hmm.
discipline, maturity,
Mm-hmm.
using what wisdom you have, thinking about the lessons that you might have learned in the past, because Saturn always brings you lessons, and you can think back to lessons you learned in the past and how can you apply those to your current situation.
Mm.
Squares often, again, this depends on whether it touches your chart deeply or, you know, or very precisely, but squares do tend to bring things, whether it's actual events or actual feelings, that ask you to sort of
Mm-hmm.
respond. So Saturn asks you to do the right thing and respond in the right way, as I say, in a mature way.
Mm-hmm.
Saturn doesn't want you to lose control, but it also doesn't want you to um, lose yourself in fear and doubt, because Saturn can bring little knocks to one's self-confidence, for example. So
Yeah.
think back to the strong, successful person that you are, that we all are, all the
Mm.
things that we do well,
Mm.
all the things that we work hard for, and
Mm.
sort of faith and trust in that, because when the Sun and Mars go into Sagittarius, they want us to have trust and faith. You know, Sagittarius is Jupiterian, so
Mm.
it asks us to have some faith, it asks us to have some trust, it asks us to have self-confidence. It's the sign of self-confidence, well, the planet of self-confidence, isn't it?
Yeah.
One of them is Jupiter. So you've got sort of Jupiter, Saturn, Pisces, sort of Jupiter, Saturn, well, Jupiter, Saturn energy really, because the traditional ruler of Pisces is Jupiter. So think about Jupiter, Saturn, and kind of try to see some purpose in what's happening, or be purposeful, take purposeful action. I think that's the best I can kind of offer in terms of, you know,
Wow.
advice, if you call it that.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Well, I just use a device, but yes. But thank you, Mandi, because it's beautiful. Yes, I think you're right. When the Sun, Mars move into the Sagittarius together with Saturn, their traditional ruler are Jupiter. So Jupiter will have important, position and maybe the shared experience or device. So the Jupiterian theme suddenly become very important. Either encourage us to be open our heart, open our mind, be be more think about the far side and look a big picture. That would be very, very useful strategy to deal with when we have a Sun Mars moving into Sagittarius and going to square Saturn. Thank you, Mandi, for taking your time out today to share your idea and about this week's transit with us, because it is so important for us. If some people are looking into the world event, world news, somehow it's very it gives us a little bit uncertainty and even just like do we really have to choose one side, and that is kind of and you can see so many anger is coming up and people are seeing, and that was like we really need to hold ourselves, to prepare ourselves to be like we say with the Jupiter, we look at the big picture. Maybe we are more much easier to deal with what we are experiencing. Thank you, Mandi, and I want to say thanks everyone to join us. Next week we have a special guest that will be the first time in our Astro Life. Is the astrologer Kenan Yasin from Turkey, and he's the first time because I read all his article and it's very interesting. He's very performed about the mundane astrology, and I think we may be going to address a little bit about the Sun Mars conjunction, but from a cycle view. That would be really interesting. Going to listen what he say. Well, but thank you, Mandi, join us, and thanks everyone join us, and see you next Wednesday. Bye bye.
Bye. Thanks, Rod. Thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye.